few more questions.
So I actually have a question. There's been a lot of response that's kind of this involuntary, I don't know if it's involuntary, but the word terrorism has brought on some very hateful and what I see as thoughtless responses. And there's been some allusion to the historical context in which the events took place that were put on trial. So this was for Ms. Levesser. I was hoping you could talk about and kind of make the connection between the aims of the actions and how those actually played out. There's been very little discussion as to how these terrorists what motivation went behind these actions. I mean,
good question.
Well, I guess this was considered resistance. There were issues that were happening at the hands of the U.S. government, not American. They were not for a free world for all of us. They were oppressing people. They're going outside the United States and dictating what governments people could have, cooperating with death squads in Central America, cooperating with apartheid in South Africa. Perhaps the means were faulted, but standing up against these travesties is very important. If we're silent, we're dead. You can't be afraid, and some of the reactionary, which I call it, is because it's without thought. It's just a knee-jerk reaction that I'm against this because I'm against this. Without thought is a very dangerous thing. We have to ask questions. We have to challenge. This is Cheney and torture, in our name. That's not what we're about, and we can't go along with that. We have to stand up against it, even if we sacrifice parts of our own life for that. Because what do we want for our children? Do we want them to live in a state where they're afraid to speak? When someone's killed and we're against the death penalty, are we going to have an atmosphere that makes us afraid to say that? So the people that are the loudest are the people who are the minority. The people who can scare us the most are really the minority. I mean, look at it. I think most people, and I think I just get this in a ride on the bus or a ride in the subway or hanging out in the doctor's office. People are very, very smart. People know what's going on. They're not out there speaking, they're out there trying to make a living, they're trying to scrape by however they can in very, very difficult times for most people now. It's always been that way for poor people. But when things get starker and the people who are the loudest can do things in our name, we have to speak up against that. We have to. And that's what motivated us, that's what motivated these acts, was trying to be loud enough for people to pay attention to it. And, that's my answer to you.
And then I just want to say something. The definition of terrorism is politically motivated random acts of violence against the civilian population. The bombings, the 11 bombings for which they were charged in Brooklyn, in which they were convicted of some of them, none of them were against civilian populations, and none of them resulted in any harm to anyone. No one was hurt in any of these bombings, except for the first one in Suffolk County, which was not charged in Brooklyn, where someone by the name of Noreen, and you can read about him, he talks, right, had his leg blown up because of the bomb, and he blamed the Massachusetts court system for not evacuating him, because they evacuated all the judges of the courthouse, but they left all the civilians there. Other than that, nobody ever got hurt in any of the bombings. You cannot support these bombings. You can think they're stupid, they're wrong, whatever. But in terms of what terrorism means, which is civilian random acts of violence, right? These were not acts of terrorism. They were acts of sabotage. And it's semantical, right? But given the vast amount of pain that terrorism causes, and which frankly never works. It never works. People don't see that. And a lot of the reasons why they don't see that is because, one, they don't look at history, and they don't see what history teaches us because they don't want to look at it. They don't want to hear why someone got to one place, right? And because there's no dialogue, right? Violence doesn't work. It doesn't. And people made a lot of mistakes about thinking that it did, but it doesn't. And I think that after being a lawyer for 35 years and representing people who have used violence, I have to tell you, it doesn't work. And that is the true story here, right? None of this works, right? It doesn't work for the Israelis. It doesn't work for the Palestinians. It doesn't work in Sri Lanka. It doesn't work. And we need a world that understands that it doesn't work, and a world that is not motivated by what the world is motivated. And just from my own point of view, if we could have women in charge.
I really think we have time for really one more question. Professor Clausen? All right.
I'm right here.
Oh, I said there's a woman over here who's been in a long time. But
over here on this side.
is that okay.
No, right there.
I don't know. I don't want to. If we had a nice. Why don't you? I took you away. I took you away from where you were. Probably a mistake. Why don't you ask?
Make it two.
Okay.
I was actually jumping off of what was said anyway, but I hear terrorism thrown a lot with this trial outside, and recently there's eco-terrorism, the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, which I think it's a very problematic use of language by the government to refer to defendants. And I was wondering if any of you wanted to speak to that, the power of that language, and what can be done to combat that.
You heard mention of the National Lawyers Guild, and the National Lawyers Guild has a hotline called the Green Scare Hotline, which is addressing just what you're asking, what your comments are. Yes, they've made essentially acts that inhibit or impede experimentation of animals. That was the Shack 7 case in Pennsylvania, acts of domestic terrorism. And under federal law, domestic terrorism increases one's exposure, being charged with a crime. At sentencing, the enhancement of being called a terrorist creates sentences that expose people who are protesting against the experimentation of animals being facing 20 years or more, rather than, I think, 15 months was the maximum if they were not charged with domestic terrorism. So they are now using all of these kind of concepts to enhance people's sentences in order to prevent people from demonstrating with regard to the destruction of the earth and the misuse of experimenting on animals. So if you are in a situation where you think you are being targeted because of those activities, there is a phone number to call at the National Lawyers Guild.
One more.
Okay, one more, because we promised we'd be out of the room.
No. There's a student.
I don't have a solution for this.
Let's just do two. Two. 1, 2.
2 and quickly, please.
1, 2, and that's it.
Okay, all right. 2.
I just wanted to know, since this case relates a lot to the First Amendment and freedom of speech, what constitutes freedom of speech to you all as a part of this case? Like, what is freedom of speech to you all as lawyers, as jurors, and as people who interpret freedom of speech in this case?
Would you repeat that? We didn't quite hear it.
What is freedom of speech
What is freedom of
in
speech to you
context
all?
of this case?
Yeah.
Freedom of speech in the context of this case is that Raymond Lavassa should be sitting here and being able to explain to you.
Freedom of speech also means that you can advocate the overthrow of this government or any other government. You are allowed to say that.
and the two other jurors could chime in. In the context of what we were doing, we were not having lofty discussions about freedom of speech. We were talking about the evidence and whether or not that we felt that we could return a verdict based on the standard of proof that was described to us, and that was beyond a reasonable doubt. So we weren't talking about, we weren't really talking about the defendants and their rights to, you know, this or that. We were talking about the case. And the case can be, you can envelop in it a lot of things, but that's not what we were doing.
Well, this is the last question.
Hi there. I'm a professor in the history department here, which was one of the original sponsors of the trial. And what we thought we were doing was collecting the papers and the stories and the material to allow people to interpret this case for history. I'm wondering if you would be, and I wonder, as someone who thinks that one of the points that Ray Levasseur would have made would have been about his reflections on what he learned in this incident. And I know we can't speculate for him, but I'm wondering if you might help us to understand what you think he might have said and why this would have been so controversial.
Well, it's interesting. He speaks all the time. He speaks in Maine all the time. He's in southern Maine. He's spoken here and there. And I speak to him, and, you know, he can say different things. But one person asked him whether, and you can go on the website and you can see all of his writings. And people should do that. You go to a website, pull out Ray Levasseur, and you'll see all of his writings, and you see how brilliant he is and what a great writer he is. And someone asked him whether he thought what he did when he was underground, to juxtapose it against all these writings that exist on the net and what everybody can see. And his response to that was that he believed that his writings were more effective than anything he did when he was underground. And that's the First Amendment, and that's history. Because what our dialogue, our communication, is what keeps us free. Right? And what this thing is all about is freedom. And it would have been better if Donna Lamonaco or any of the other law enforcement people who were here would have come here and explained to us and listened to us, and then maybe we would have been in better shape. Right? As long as people don't listen to each other and don't allow people to speak, we're always going to be in bad shape. So thank you for coming.
Before you go, I'd just like to